Hi everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Selling with a Difference, Transiting to an E-commerce Platform. This webinar is a collaboration between Law Society Pro Bono Services and the National Philanthropy and Volunteer Center. My name is Amira Budiano, and I am the moderator chairing this session. Now first, before we begin, please listen to some of our housekeeping matters. Firstly, please feel free to ask questions at any time during the webinar using the Q&A icon located at the bottom of your Zoom window. We will do our best to address your questions during or at the end of the talk. Number two, please note that the discussion and any material provided in this webinar is not intended to substitute or constitute as professional legal advice. So you should consult a lawyer if you require specific legal advice. Now, let me introduce our panel for today. Our first panelist is Samuel. Samuel Yen is the Managing Director of Yuan Law LLC, an award-winning Singapore law practice specializing in legal issues relating to startups and emerging companies, and the head of its corporate practice group. Since starting his practice in 2001, Samuel has gained a reputation as a creative but pragmatic practitioner of law who is able to provide effective legal solutions. Samuel is also active in the local business and charitable communities and spends his time outside of work with his only daughter. Welcome, Samuel. Our next panelist is Jonathan. Jonathan Chang is the Head of Growth for Governments and Organizations at Shopify. Previously, he was the Country Head of Google for Education Next Billion Users (NBU) initiative in Indonesia. Prior to Google, he served as a senior advisor for higher education at Indonesia's Ministry of Education, Culture, Research, and Technology. In addition, he was the executive director of National University of Singapore's Entrepreneurship Centre and the Overseas Colleges, and of Singapore Management University's Lien Centre for Social Innovation, in which Jonathan pioneered the university's accreditation as Asia's first Ashoka Changemaker campus. Welcome, Jonathan. Thank you both of you for joining us today. Now, before we begin, we would like to do two short polls to understand our audience better. So, can we have the poll up on the screen, please? All right, and so you should be seeing the poll where the first question is, does your organization already have an e-commerce platform? And you can choose one answer. The next question is, if you had answered no, are you currently thinking of setting one up? So if you had answered yes, you can leave this blank. And the third question is, which kind of product or service does your organization sell or intend to sell on the platform? And there are four options there, so you can just choose one. All right, let's give a little bit of time for our participants to be recording their responses. And if you have just joined our webinar today, we're currently conducting a poll and we're requesting you to please record your responses. Okay, I have an indication that almost everybody has already replied, so we will be closing this poll now. All right, and we should all be seeing the poll results. Okay, so the first question, whether we already have an e-commerce platform, only 32% say yes and 67% say no. So this is going to be a very interesting conversation for all of you because we will be touching on many topics that will be of interest, especially if you are considering embarking on this journey. Next question, if you had answered no, are you currently thinking of setting one up? 71% say yes. So that's very good. You're at the right place, definitely. That is an affirmative answer. And the third one, which kind of product or service do you intend to sell or are already selling? So I think it seems quite even out, but quite a bigger percentage, 39% is into handicraft related, whereas 31% is into service. So that's interesting for our panelists to note today as well, because 31% are interested in providing service-related offerings on the platform. And this is obviously much different than just providing food or handicraft or other goods on the platform. All right. So thank you, everybody, for all of your responses. Now, to give everybody a better sense of what to expect, now let me give you an outline on what we will be discussing in this webinar. So the first step to embarking on this journey and getting the approvals, that will be our first segment. The second segment would be about setting up the e-store, and then what's next. The third segment to our session today will be about sustainability. So we are going to be talking about how to keep your e-commerce store sustainable. Now, to make it easier for us to discuss these topics and also for you to visualize the situations better, we're going to be using a hypothetical organization as point of reference and follow in his journey in considering how to and whether to start having the e-commerce platform to create a new revenue stream for itself. So you are seeing on the screen our first scenario, and we'll be following through the journey of Jamie and Lee from this hypothetical organization. So just wanted to let everybody know so we can all follow the situations and the discussions more carefully. Okay, so let's get started with our first segment. So Jamie and Lee are part of the development team at a charity. Now, due to the many upheavals that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought about, donations have been greatly affected. So they attended the presentation by NVPC and Shopify on the e-commerce platform and think that it'll be a great opportunity for the charity to consider opening an e-commerce platform to sell the many handicrafts made by their beneficiaries to help bring in a revenue stream for the organization. Now, I understand that quite a proportion of you may have also attended this presentation, but there will be some, I believe, that may not have had the opportunity to attend. So I'm going to start with Jonathan. Jonathan, can you help us by sharing briefly about Shopify as compared to other e-commerce platforms so that we can all be on the same starting point as we start this discussion today? Jonathan?
Thank you so much, Amira, and hi, everybody. Hi, Sam. That's a very good question. I'm glad that you asked that question. Look, Shopify as a brand, people might or might not be aware of us. Even if they are not fully aware of us, chances are at some point you are interacting with an e-commerce platform that is hosted on Shopify engine. So we're behind many brands out there, small and large. We provide an end-to-end solutions for their e-commerce store, the web front to the back end as well. So we're talking about from the product listing, payments to inventory management, digital marketing. A lot of e-commerce stores like to set up some kind of promotions or vouchers or newsletters. We have all of that. Matter of fact, we even have an app store attached to our platform in which people can get many other, their favorite solutions, tools, web tools out there that can be integrated now. So that's a quick description on that. Second of all, we are somewhat different. Well, we're different from marketplaces. So I just wanted to make that distinction for a second. Marketplaces, I'm not going to name names, but you know it. Many of us are shopping on it as well. Marketplaces, you are one of the brands, right? So you go to the website, you search for a particular product, and then you have a list of those products supplied by many stores. And they can be located in Singapore, but they can also be located in other places. If you think about Shopify, whatever store that we host, it's a dedicated store, it's your store. So when customers go to your website and interact with you, you own the customer experience. You own the design. You own the theme of whatever that you want to have. You also have a lot of freedom and power. That's how Shopify looks at it as well, to engage your customers in whatever way that you want, either through Facebook marketing, TikTok, or even other social media engagement, and streamline it within the platform. So I would say that we're one-stop shop. We're here. Our mission is to make commerce better for everyone. And the keyword there is everyone. That's one of the reasons why we're so excited to be part of this webinar and working with MVPC and our partner, Law Society, because we're here to cater to all the different kind of needs, whether you're nonprofits, charities, or pure commercial companies. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Jonathan. I think that's a very helpful summary and really an introduction to what Shopify is. So I think we know it is not an e-marketplace, and that really the organizations would be owning the page and what goes on there, and how it looks like and how everything flows. So that also makes it more important for all of us to understand how we're going to navigate through, how to even get on board, right? Because a lot of our audience today are interested to set up their e-commerce store in order to create the additional revenue stream. So now let's go quickly into the legal issues, right? So Sam, now looking at this situation here, right? This hypothetical situation here. Now, if Jamie and Lee, they want to prepare to propose this to their management and the board. Now, what are the legal considerations that they need to prepare for their proposal? Now, in giving us some insights, right, Sam, I want you to also tell us, does the charity's constitution matter? Like, in particular, will it affect whether this proposal is even possible in the first place?
Thanks, Amira. I think we have to start with the most important document in the list that you mentioned, and that, of course, is the constitution of the charity. As a charitable organization, you are either formed as a registered society or a company limited by guarantee. In both cases, you will have a document called the Constitution. It acts like the governing law or governing rule book for your organization. Now, you'll find that for the older charities, you will have a whole list of objectives within your constitution, or in some really old cases, it will be called the Articles of Association and Memorandum of Association. Now, under the Memorandum of Association, there would possibly be a list of objectives. Now, under those constitutions, if it has not been updated, you are kind of stuck doing only those things that are listed as being permissible. But by and large, newer charities and those that have been formed in the past 15, 20 years should not have this problem. However, it is always prudent to go through your constitution to make sure that whatever you're planning on doing doesn't offend the constitution. Now, a special highlight has to be made regarding registered societies. Now, registered societies technically can't really own businesses, but again, you have to check your constitution. Usually, you have to do it through a trustee. Now, back to Jamie and Lee's scenario, right? You'll find that as part of a development team, you're probably a subcommittee or a committee within the charity, which means that you are probably subject to terms of references or TORs. So these TORs will set out the scope of your ability or your authority, okay, to do stuff. and you might want to consider whether what you are going to propose is within your TOR or your scope. Okay, for sure, if you are going to embark on something like this, it is fairly material and substantive in nature. So you ought to run it by management and the board. If anything, you want their buy-in, you want them to support the venture, and you might need resources that only they can provide. So it is always a good idea to run it by management and run it by the board. As a former board member of an IPC, I know it's very important that for board members to feel that the team is checking them on such things, because you really don't want the charity to receive any bad press, or you don't want there to be any commercial disputes arising from such ventures. I also want to just add that in fact, right, if you are going to embark on something like that, you should also bear in mind that if you are a charitable organization, please be reminded that the 30-70 rule applies. Yeah, so your fundraising activities are subject to the 30-70 rule, 30% efficiency rule. Okay, so not more than 30% of whatever you have fundraised should be applied to non-charitable purposes. Yeah. So back to you, Amira.
Yeah. Thanks. I think that was a very good introduction also, Sam, because we have discussed about the charity's constitution and about getting approvals. Now I'm going to just give you a little bit of a break, Sam, and turn to Jonathan and ask him, John, what are some of the top questions organizations have when they approach Shopify expressing interest in opening an account? And then presumably also to these organizations are from the charitable sector, the charity sector. Yeah, but you can let us know. You can let us know maybe a perspectives from the charity sector as well as the non-charity sector, if there is a difference, or if the questions they're asking are different as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think from the strategy perspective, it shouldn't have any difference. It's actually quite the same whether you sell a product for commercial usage, for profit, or you sell products and services to fundraise, right? Because at the end of the day, it is about your relationship with the consumers. I think that is one thing that actually I wanted to point out, because oftentimes the social service organizations or nonprofits or even social enterprises that I work with in my prior role, just like what you stated in my bio intro, when I was at the Lian Center, I think I probably know some of the attendees here. Some of the questions that come up with whether they have to kind of change the way they interact with the beneficiaries. I would say, the supporters. I would say it's almost identical. People will like to buy products that they can develop some kind of connection with, either from the story or the quality as well, or both. I think the downside, if we're just focusing on the story or the sort of like, when you buy something, you can support this organization or you can support this cause. What I'm concerned with that kind of strategy, I'm not saying it is wrong, right? Okay, so it's up to you to decide. But what my concern is, when we're too focused on that one, on that strategy alone, then the chance of customers coming back to your website or to your store and rebuy or even buy products for other people, if the quality is not that high, the chance is very low, right? So having high quality products and services is such an important part of it. And even the storytelling aspect of it, right? We're talking about not just the messaging. Yes, the messaging is important, but also the design of the website and the design of the user flow. So I think those are some of the questions that we often get from people on how to make their websites more engaging. We have a number of webinars that people can go to our website and kind of watch it themselves. And also there are other people as well that putting up videos already on YouTube. That's the good thing about coming to a platform like Shopify. Is already established brand. There's a lot of people already sharing their experiences. And last but not least, and this one is the only difference that I would say that I can think of, that nonprofits and charities, they usually ask whether there is a preferential pricing. The great news is there is. So there is special pricing for nonprofits and charities at Shopify. You just have to go to our web page under the nonprofit section, and then you can apply. And then of course there are some documentations that we require to make sure that you are a charity has a charity status and nonprofit. But otherwise, I would say everything else is quite identical.
Right. Okay. I'm going to come back to you, Jonathan, and ask you questions on our Jamie and Lee situation. But I want to move to Samuel first, and try to get more legal responses from Samuel here, which I think of interest our attendees. Okay, so we're gonna have two questions lumped into one. Samuel, challenge for you. So we want to know about the entity type and status, right? From a legal perspective, does charity strictly need to set up another entity for the purposes of opening this e-commerce store? Because you talked about the constitution earlier, right? Whether it's okay to even start on this. So let's say we can. Now, does the charity need to set up another entity for this purpose? And how about tax deduction issues? Do you foresee any potential tax deduction issues in issuing tax deductible receipts when using this platform?
Okay, thanks, Amira. Let me start by quoting one of the greatest men who ever lived, Benjamin Franklin. And he said this: "Our new constitution is now established. Everything seems to promise it will be durable. But in this world, nothing is certain except for death and taxes." So I think when we look at a question involving tax issues, right, we have to start from that point of understanding that more likely than not, the general principle is that taxes will be involved. Now, and let me just infuriate everyone by talking like a lawyer right now. Whether there will be any tax deduction issues, okay, get this, it depends on very much on what kind of setup you use. And that setup, by what kind of setup, I mean, the entity types, the status of the entity, how the entities transact with one another. So if you look at it from a very general principles perspective, any business activity, okay, any like earning of salary and all the way to the sale of an item that results in a profit, okay, all these will ultimately attract taxes. However, as a charity, once you're recognized as a charitable organization by the Commissioner of Charities, you are granted a special status where your income is actually not taxable. All right, so that everyone knows that, right? And if you are granted status as an IPC, okay, it goes one level higher. Your donors, okay, are exempted from taxation for the amount that is donated. In fact, there is still some additional tax credit involved, right? However, let's focus on the charitable status aspect of the discussion here. If you are selling directly, okay, on the platform, any platform, if the charities are the ones earning the income, then of course, as I mentioned earlier, the 30-70 rule, it still applies, right? And you are more likely than not exempted from taxation. However, if you set up a structure for whatever purposes, there are a lot of permutations here, but let's look at the general type. Okay, if you set up a private company or a private entity to do the transactions, okay, maybe you are somehow barred from doing so under the charitable organization, right? So if you set up something like that, the private company, okay, will be the one deemed to have made that received that income, right? In which case, it means that that income is also subject to taxation. Now, again, it matters not if you are donating it all away, right? And it matters not if you call yourself a social enterprise, right? Because under Singapore's laws, we only recognize charities and other companies, right? So there's no in-between category. It's not on the spectrum. It is very you know, is binary, right? In that sense. So if you are not a charity, okay, even if you are linked to a charity, you are deemed to have made that income and you have to pay taxation on that, right? And any donations that you make to the charity is always considered post-tax, all right? So that is a conundrum that quite a few of us find ourselves in. If you open up a new separate legal entity kind of setup to generate revenue, the question is always this: could it not be done in a simpler way or more direct way? I was told by one of my law professors many years ago that the highest form of beauty is simplicity itself. So maybe sometimes it's worth taking a look at the simpler setups before you move on to the more exotic kind. Back to you, Amira.
Okay. I think there were a lot of points there. So, if any of our attendees here have questions on what Samuel's saying, right, or any other follow-up questions, please do drop them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your Zoom window. But for now, while everyone's still processing what you just said, Sam, let's go back to Jonathan. And Jonathan, what are some tips that you can share, right? Going back to the same situation here, that you can share with Jamie and Lee to make a convincing presentation to the board to get approval. Now, this is important because, we want to make sure that the board has the relevant information and understands where we're going at. So what are some tips that you can share with Jamie and Lee, Jonathan?
Yeah, again, this advice, please take it with a grain of salt, right? I like the idea of having a small pilot. Don't jump in immediately setting this up and going full force. First of all, resources is always limited. I understand that. I was in the social sector. I understand resources across the board is quite limited and very limited. So we want to make sure that when we allocate resources accordingly. So I would like to start with a small pilot first. If I were to advise this particular organization. Why is it the pilot is important? Because one, to test out whether the messaging, whether it's actually there is a demand for this, that's one. Second, that will also create a stronger case to bring it to the board, right? So of course you can always try to convince somebody to support you on an idea itself. But I like to at least get some kind of pilot going, get some real feedback from real customers or even potential customers, survey people to really understand the market well, so that when the board or anybody else want to make a decision is based on a data-driven approach instead of based on gut instinct or I feel this might work, or I think this might work, or I see other people are doing this and I think we should be doing that as well. All of these things, you should not even use the word I think, I feel, or my hunch. It should be, these are the feedback that we get from the ground. These the number of people that we have surveyed, and these are the results. And these are some of the similar solutions out there in our sector, and this is how they're doing and things like that. And it takes some time. So if I may, I share with you one small case study. I co-produced this case study when I was still as a faculty lead at SMU. This is about the organization Minds. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you in the sector, know what Mind is. But for those that are not familiar, it's the movement for the intellectually disabled of Singapore. They are a non-profit organization, charity organization. This case study is available at SMU. You can go and I guess they're trying to sell it. Apologies, but but anyway. So the whole idea is it took them 7 years. So they started this idea of setting up a unit to help sell products, and it took them about 7 years before they put in real resources behind it. Just because, again, resources was limited. They wanted to see whether this is something that they can continue on or not. Yeah, so that's my take.
Right. I think Jonathan, that's a really good point to me. Like being objective, right, in the way we present our views and thoughts, right?
And because, and also being realistic.
Yeah, that's right. And which is why you're suggesting to have like a pilot to start small, and so I guess that also gives us like better results or better sort of statistics, right? That will be able to measure proper outcomes as well. And I think that's really a very important point. We were seeing as well earlier that from the poll results that a lot of our attendees are interested in moving in this direction, and also interested in selling services, right? Okay, like a big proportion was services and handicrafts, so that was interesting. So I want to move on into the next part of our segment of our discussion, which we want to focus on some of the more practical aspects of setting up the e-store. Jonathan has been talking about some of the practical tips already. So I want to continue on in that same line of discussion here. Just if you wanted to add on, Jonathan, in your experience, right, were there any additional thought processes that one would need to have before even embarking on creating this online store? And maybe this would target, the percentage that were not thinking of moving into the e-store yet, but maybe could be motivated or inspired to move in this direction after our webinar.
Yeah. So I'm looking at the number again. 71% is thinking about setting up, and then the 29. So maybe by the end of this, we're closer to the 90 plus. But that's a good question. So look, my advice is actually, again, this is applicable whether it is for charity, organization, non-profit, or even social enterprises, or even more on a commercial. If you decided to do this more on the pure commercial basis. First thing first, you need to understand what the mission and the vision for your store. Why that is important, because that will determine the type of messaging, the type of content, the type of products that you wanted to sell, and the price point. And then also the way you engage your customers or your potential customers. All of this is part of the overall branding. Again, it's quite important these days that we pay attention to that, because it is not as simple as I put up a product and then somehow it will sell. It doesn't work like that. Why? Because as consumer, even all of us here, including those that are in attendees now or the ones that would be watching this later, just ask ourselves the way we shop. We don't shop, we shop because we develop some kind of connection somehow with a certain brand or a certain product. Of course, there are some products that we're just saying that, it's cheap, I'm just gonna buy it for now. Of course, there are purchasing decisions like that, but I think what I wanted to focus on, what I think we all should be focusing on, is how to create a long-lasting brand and connections with your customers. So I would say, it is quite important, again, to summarize it, that the mission and the vision is quite important, because that will dictate the branding, the messaging, and your target market and your price point. And second, I would say, whether you wanted to do this one-off, or is it something that you wanted to continuously build to have additional products, additional services. Why I say that, because again, some organizations, they just wanted to have one-off fundraising event, a virtual gala or in-person gala before the pandemic, hopefully soon enough that we can do that. I get it, that's a one-off fundraising process. You can do that. But also if you start thinking that, well, perhaps this is something that is going to be part of our as our strategy for being financially sustainable in the long run, rather than just depending on donation, which we all know donation can fluctuate, right? When the economy is tough, definitely people tighten up their wallets. That also will affect the type of money that people want to donate. So I think if you want to do something like that, then you have to think about the way you engage your customers and how you interact with them, maybe newsletters and social media platform presence, and putting up a consistent way to engage people. Again, it is not just about setting up an Instagram account. It is not just about setting up an Facebook account or Twitter. It is about the messaging. And again, we've seen it in commercial. So my advice is to everybody, you should not use the same posting. I've seen this a lot. People posted something on Facebook, they cut and paste, and then they post the same one on Twitter, and they use the same one on Instagram. It's different platform. People consume the media differently, and so you have to cater that as well. So understanding that, I would say, would give you at least a strong groundwork in the beginning.
Right. I think I get your message that, you need to obviously have a very clear idea in your mind, right, as to how you foresee the store is going to pan out, and how is it going to help in the strategy, in the global strategy for the organization, right? Obviously, knowing what is the mission, vision, is totally important, and also helps with the sustainability, which is, going to be our next topic. So we'll come back more into that. But right now, and you also mentioned earlier just on price points, right? So what I wanted to ask you, Jonathan, really was, obviously we should think about price points, but
Yes.
we're not in the sector where we are thinking for profit, right? It's so not instinctive, right? Price points. So what are some tips that you can share with our attendees on charging of price points? And try to think about, like, say, for example, the entire supply chain, because now they're trying to sell something on this e-commerce store, right? And then it's not just putting it up there, but then what happens next, right? Getting it to the consumer, to the customer that's going to be paying for that particular goods or services. So what would be your tips on price points?
Good questions, and I'm going to answer it into the sort of there are three factors that I can think of. Of course, there are more. When we have a longer conversation, I can cover more. But there are three factors that tend to determine the price range or price point for a product. One is the cost of goods sold. That is very important. I've seen it enough, even amongst my students, when I teach at SMU or NUS or other places. Again, cuts across all sectors. People tend to not include staff costs, the cost of their time, packaging, fulfilling the order, promoting this and that. They said, yeah, but you have to do that, because that is considered the cost to run the store, and it's also the cost that you need to cover, right? Because we only have 24 hours in a day. So whatever that I spend on that day, I cannot spend it on anything else. So there is an opportunity cost. So I think that is one thing that you need to take into consideration, is the cost of goods sold. And that includes materials, shipping, packaging, and stuff like that. The second part is comparables. Comparable is quite important, because you don't want to also set up a price in which you are so far off, not just high, but it could be so low in comparison to other products. Why that is important? Because think about it. All of us here, I see all of the attendees, right? Have you ever been to a place and then you see the price point and maybe too low, and you were thinking to yourself, well, the quality maybe not that great, right? If it's so good, why would the price too low? You see, people can think about the same thing when they're interacting with your store. So you need to know how much you can charge and what is the reasonable price. And the price point also, you need to be careful not to give too much, that the price cannot drop too drastically in a very short amount of time. You can run promo, but I don't suggest you to keep dropping your price. Again, there is a perceived value with price point, just how we consumer. And last but not least is your target market that is important as well, right? So you can have a really, really great product and your price point is really competitive. But if your target, your supporters are in a different economic, social, in a different purchasing power bracket, then it does, you run into two things here, two things. One is that you will not get a lot of people buying your products. And second, which is the worst, I would say, in my personal opinion, is that you are seen as out of touch with reality. That your supporters look at you and say, wow, I mean, what you're trying to rob me or what? It's like, it's like they're thinking, wow, usually it's like this, So I think you gotta make sure that the price point is related to, something that people feel like, yes, this is a good quality of products. I don't mind paying this way, but also it resonates with your supporters and not seen as out of touch or just suddenly being elitist. And I think that's quite bad for a brand.
Right. I think, we definitely have to reformulate a strategy when it comes to coming up with the right price to that particular, product or service that we are going to be offering on the e-commerce platform or Shopify. Because it sounds to me like it could really affect not just the sellability of that particular offering, but also in the long run, what kind of messaging, what kind of reputation or impression we may be forming with the consumers or the customers that could be transacting on the platform. So those are definitely very interesting things for us to take note of. And I wanna ask Samuel now, because we've been talking a lot with you, Jonathan. So I want to ask Samuel if you had any comments to add to what Jonathan has been sharing, and I wanted to also float to you a question that we have received from one of our attendees. Thank you very much. Samuel, it's a little bit broad here. So we're dealing with business selling goods and services, right? But what are some of the legal aspects or areas that the business should be thinking or taking note of? And more importantly, I think the question is targeted to trying to figure out, is there any difference operating online and offline? And Samuel, maybe you could think of it as like, having a bake sale, like a physical bake sale versus actually just, doing it online. Is there any difference from a legal perspective? Yeah. Samuel?
Sure, thanks. Now, let me just pick up from where Jonathan had left off. And in fact, it is very important that part of how you portray yourself, how you position yourself in the shop is done properly as well. Legally speaking, there is an impact, because if you come up with a 50-pager agreement to just for them to buy a handcrafted wooden doll, for example, it's kind of an overkill, and it does lend to the idea that perhaps you're a bit out of touch. But from a legal perspective, maybe you ought to change your lawyers. But jokes aside, back to the general principles of it. If you like it, you should have put a ring on it, right? To quote Queen Bee, okay. But at the end of the day, it is it's true, okay? If that transaction is important to you, or that relationship is important, then it ought to have been managed by a legal contract. Now, what does that mean in our context? If you set up a store or you sell things through a platform, who are your stakeholders here? Right? It could be the manufacturer who's making these items for you. It could be the service providers that are very glad to back room for you to provide these services. It could very well be the retailers or the consumers that are looking to acquire the goods or the services from you, right? So these are important relationships, and you ought to make sure that they are managed properly with legal contracts. What are contracts? Contracts are agreements, okay, or documents which are legally binding and enforceable, and you ought to have certain elements of contract formation: offer and acceptance, consideration, and an intention to be legally bound. Yeah, so this is just the tip of the iceberg. Of course, you speak with any lawyer worth his salt, he'll be able to tell you, he or she will be able to tell you all this and help you set up the legal documentation necessary. Now, when you buy online or you sell online, most of these contracts, right, tend to manifest themselves as terms and conditions. You'll find it as a click wrap, okay, or maybe it's something that you have to click I accept before you can proceed to make the acquisition, or you can even view the item, right? Or for the services to be provided. Now, to answer Kayan's question, legally speaking, there is very little difference between operating online and offline, okay, from a legal perspective. Yeah. We have this wonderful thing called the Electronic Transactions Act, which essentially renders all electronic agreements to have the same effect as your pen and paper agreements. So when you transact online, there are certain practical and operational challenges, right, which Jonathan covered in great detail. There are also, however, legally speaking, it is one and the same. You still need an offer, you need an acceptance, you need consideration, and you need that intention to be legally bound, yeah, in order for the transaction to occur, right? There is a difference, however, depending on whether you are selling goods or services. Now, goods tend to be one and done, you know. That means you pay me, I give you this item or this article, or we can exchange the two at the same time. If you go to most of the shopping platforms available now, it is always I pay first, or I put monies in escrow with the payment platform. And once I receive the goods, I will release payment, right? So it works in that way. However, when you talk about services being rendered, it does get a bit more ambiguous, right? Because then you have to consider what are the milestones, right? How do I render the service, and what are the milestones in the process of rendering the service that I could actually get paid in part for, right? So it's up to you. You can structure it such that you get paid right at the beginning, and then you do your job. Then, of course, the consumer bears the risk, your client bears the risk. Or you can do it the other way around, which is I perform the service and then I wait for payment. Then, of course, you bear the risk, right? Or you can do milestones, right? So let's say you engage me to bring 10 of my guys to paint your house. When we finish one room, and that's the end of the day's job, you pay us X dollars, right? So you can arrange for such payment structures as well. Again, it is all down to the brass tacks. You know, practically, how do you enforce it? Practically, how do you work it into your payment structure? That also brings in mind issues regarding refund and returns, liabilities, indemnifications, you know, and the list goes on, right? But of course, all these are part and parcel of a legal contract. yeah, I think I covered what the question asked. And yeah, I think that's all I have for now, Amira. Maybe we can move on to the next question.
Sure. So actually, it's just very timely that we're moving to the next segment, and this is the last segment where we want to talk about the sustainability of the e-store. So we want to basically assume that the setting up, right, is all done, right, and basically organizations ready to sell, and in fact, they have already begun selling, and now we're thinking about how to sustain the e-store. So you did, mention about refunds and liabilities and all that, right? And of course, a good lawyer would have included and considered all of that, especially when coming up with, say, the terms of use of the platform, for example. But Samuel, I want you to consider, okay, so let's say the situation here is that Jamie and Lee, our friends here, they had their terms of use of the platform reviewed by, maybe wasn't reviewed. Okay, let's say it wasn't reviewed. And that's why it's missing some important clauses and some important sections. And now they realize that, they didn't think about the return or refund policies. And then they just never expected there to be any return or refunds. I mean, after all, they're doing it for charity. So they weren't expecting anyone to actually complain or make any requests for returns or refunds. So what kind of recommendations can you make to them now, and how can they improve the running of their e-stores so that they are protected rain or shine? I mean, just assuming they never got their terms of use or terms and conditions or any of their agreements reviewed. So what can we do? How can we fix the situation now, Samuel?
Firstly, I want to laud them for their idealism, but unfortunately, we do live in a world that's pretty broken. And yes, there's always going to be this issue as to whether you run into trouble or not. So first off, it is always a good idea to have a set of terms and conditions. Now, the question as to whether it ought to be reviewed by lawyers or not is really a question of legal risk management. Yeah. Of course, if you have a headache and you get headaches when you don't drink enough water, probably drinking water will solve your problem, right? But if it doesn't, then it could be a sign of something that is a bit more benevolent in nature. And that is when you go to a doctor, right? And the law isn't that much different from how you would see medicine, right? You can try and self-administer to a point. But beyond that point, it is really about whether you have the expertise and whether you want to bear the legal risk moving forward. Now, if the contracts were in fact drafted by a law firm and you find that, it's lacking in so many ways, then maybe the correct recourse would be to make a complaint with our fine friends at Law Society and ask them to conduct an investigation into whether the lawyers have been negligent. But by and large, these are quite, I would say, daily routine kind of work for most lawyers. These issues will have been considered. Yeah. Okay. What are they? All the what if question. Okay. All the worst case scenario questions. What if I don't get payment? What if the goods get lost in transit? Right? What if the goods arrive, but they are broken? The goods are broken or damaged beyond use. I'm sure we all have had that experience where we buy something online only for it to come to our possession in an unusable state because it's crushed, or because maybe it was handled in a rough manner, or maybe because the description don't match what it's supposed to be, right? Or what has been advertised. So again, the devil is in the details. You have to look at the contracts. You have to look at the terms and conditions, okay, in order to establish fault or liability. Now, I would always recommend to someone in their position to really consider how they are legally protected. But whether you're running an e-store or a brick and mortar store, the considerations are the same. When can your clients claim against you? Okay, and when can you claim against the manufacturer? Yeah, in this case, I'm talking regardless of whether you are getting your beneficiaries to handmade these things, or whether you are buying, from Taobao, and then of course printing your logo on it and selling these limited edition items, right? So who can you claim against? Make sure that in your contracts it's stated very clearly. All right, if you absolve all liability, you say, of course, I'm excluded from liability if the item comes to you with, maybe instead of having 3 stars, it comes with 2.5 stars. I'm not liable because it's still that object, right? So it is really a question of fact here. But I would recommend that they make sure that their contracts have been vetted through by a professional, and whether these contracts are relevant for purpose or fit for purpose will very much depend on the structure and the transaction model that you highlight to your lawyers. So perhaps that is the other takeaway from this section. If you're going to see a lawyer, don't just say, I want terms and conditions, right? Because they'll take you at your word and draft you something very general. But take the time, sit down with your lawyers over a cup of coffee, make sure they don't charge you for it, and work out step by step, right? The transactional flow, right? So that your lawyers understand exactly what you are trying to cover and how you intend to cover it, right? So with that kind of outline in place, you are mitigating and limiting the risks that you could actually expose yourself to because of poor communication between yourself and your lawyers. Yep.
Right.
Back to you, Amira.
Right. I actually don't think the recourse would be to complain to the Law Society, right? I think the recourse would be maybe to see whether there was a miscommunication or whether it was not discussed properly as to the actual scope of what you want to see covered. And maybe the question could just easily be asked, like, what else should I have in my terms of use of terms and conditions based on your experience? And I'm sure, your legal advisor will be able to tell you, based on his or her experience, what kind of terms you would want to see reflected. Now, we have a question, and I thought that, Sam, although you've already answered it, implicitly, I just wanted you to, address it very directly so that we can close this question. So the question here is, who bears the responsibility for lost packages?
Who bears the responsibility for lost packages? Well, I hate to give you this very lawyerly answer, but it depends, right? It depends on the terms and conditions governing the delivery, the transaction itself, right? The circumstances under which the packages have gotten lost plays a part, just as well as the legal terms deciding when possession of the item had passed or when legal title has passed. Yeah, so it is not an easy question to answer, okay? Because you will need to look at the factual matrix and decide from there to ascertain what in fact had happened and how that happenstance actually could be viewed in the context of your legal documentation and your terms and conditions. Yeah.
All right. So,
Amira, may I jump in?
Yeah, sure.
A bit on this particular issue, because I think it's quite important for store owners to be aware of this, right? So there's a good question. Now, what may or may not be legally covered, that is sometimes a separate discussion from what you want from a business perspective, right? Because legally, it might be okay for you to not respond to that or say, I'm not legally bind, it's not I'm not legally obligated to cover lost packages. But you have to think about it like this, right? Consumers, they can bring their grievances online. On social media, they can trash your brand, they can leave bad comments, bad reviews. And so these are more on the business side, right? So I'm going to cover a couple of things very quickly. One, I like to advise store owners, if this is the route that you wanted to take, please document everything from the shipping. Take photos of what the products looks like, the boxes, the packaging, the delivery. If you have to leave the package in front of a door, please take the photo. Ask the delivery person to take the photo as well. And then any kind of communications like that, and it has to be clear, right? So is this going to be left outside of your door? What happens if there's nobody at the door? Is this a perishable product? Because, again, some products you cannot just leave it, even if the consumer says, I'm okay for you to leave it in front of my door. But if the product is perishable and then you don't know how long is it, maybe you want to, as a brand, you want to make a stand and say, we don't allow that. Unless if you're really okay with that. I'll give you, again, not naming the name of the brand, but I had a case in which I bought something that is perishable and I know that I'm not going to be at home. And that company asked me, okay, so in that case, then we will call you and you need to record your voice saying that you are completely okay with the product being left outside of your door, and then you take full response. Now, I'm not saying that's what you have to do, but I'm saying is sometimes some businesses will go towards it because you want to protect yourself, right? Exactly what you're saying, sort of, Samuel. Before we go into the legal part of it, is sometimes the social media can quite be nasty, right? So that is one. And second, prevention. So from Shopify perspective, our advice to merchants and even individual on the prevention side, I would say that before you ship out something or having a product, spend a little bit of time doing a test run. You can do this on your own. Maybe you look at the packaging, what kind of packaging, where to put certain things. Is it breakable easily? Maybe you want to put extra padding. And I would say that before you ship something out to any customers, ship it to somebody you know first. Right, because that is the cheapest way, right? The cheapest way is to ship it, like that's why I say, like, do a test run. Maybe your friends or family place an order, what it looks like from online payment, customer experience, you package it, you ship it, either through one of the shipping companies or you yourself, whatever it is, and see how it goes and give feedback. Also, you have to think about how to maximize your packaging to reduce the cost. Again, there are a number of ways where store owners can save money and increase their profit margins. It's not just through the pricing on the page, but also through the packaging, through what kind of things that you want to ship. Maybe there are some products that you wanted to sell. They are super heavy, but in terms of value, actually, you cannot charge very high. Now that you want to rethink, right? Is it worth it to ship a product that is so heavy that it will incur a high shipping cost, but the product itself doesn't have a high market value because it's going to cost you money? And second of all, whether consumers actually want to buy it. Would I want to buy something that costs $10 or $15, but the shipping alone is $7, $8? It's like 50% of the cost. Maybe not. So something like this you need to think about.
I really love these practical tips, and things for us to think about, Jonathan. I mean, I hope, our attendees are, finding them as useful and also jotting down notes as you go along. And I just wanted you to add on to the considerations that you have already been sharing, but I want you to talk more about, for example, the roles and responsibilities, right? Jamie and Lee, right, our friends from the development team, they may have been the ones to start up the store, right? But maybe they're not going to be the persons running the store, and maybe we need to have more people brought in. I don't know, what would be your thoughts on the manpower and logistics of things?
Yes, that we've seen it before. So again, when I was at the Lian Center, one of the organizations that we work with, we actually advised them not to go that route. I'll tell you what that route they wanted to take. So they wanted to ask us, they wanted to create an internship program in which they will have some undergraduate students from SMU to come to their organization and help manage the e-commerce platform. Now, it sounds great, right? Because you got young people who really know social media, know about this thing, and they can make it as part of the internship. It's good on their resume. It's also good on the nonprofit side. But we actually advise them to rethink that and be careful with that route. The reason is because, look, students, they're busy. Okay, anybody that has been through the education system in Singapore is aware the classwork can be overwhelming. So priority for them, obviously education, classwork first, right, for most of them. So what's going to happen is, let's say you were doing this and then the students are not committed, or they only work for a certain amount of time, let's say 3 months or 6 months. And then after that, now what, right? You are left with the system that not only you were not aware, you're not accustomed to, now at the level where it might take a different kind of set of skill, right? To set up is one thing, to actually maintain and run is another thing, and also to grow. So I would say that if you do wanted to start something like that, really invest in some type of training for an internal person. You don't have to really be an expert in e-commerce, but at least not allergic to the tools or not completely disconnect with the online presence that you want to have. Why you wanted to do that? Because at least there is some kind of handover. So that is one. And second, you might want to think, because if the e-commerce side, the e-store is doing really well, doesn't hurt to hire somebody as well, the headcount. My advice usually to anybody that concerned about money, hiring somebody to run their store, I said to them, it doesn't matter what the salary of that person is. If that person can make you more than that salary that you pay to the person, that person is worth it. Yeah. Let me repeat: a salesperson or person that doing all of this selling, it doesn't matter what they cost. What matters is how much value, how much revenue that person can create for you. Because some of the, now I'm talking about in the bigger scale, some of the best salespeople in any company, sometimes their salary even much higher than the CEO, but the company are gladly pay them the top salary. You know why? Because they bring so much money. They're paid by commission, right? So to them, to the company, it shouldn't matter. Like, you can make as much money you want, because as long as you bring in these numbers, right? So I would advise that, it's okay to invest in that type of thing. And do a little bit of training. That's why a platform like Shopify, it's quite powerful, because the learning curve is not going to be as steep.
Yeah. Let me jump in there. And I do really agree with what Jonathan is saying. I've seen clients that have relied heavily on intern power. It's quite fun. It has its advantages. One of which is that it is really cheap or sometimes free. Interns are generally very enthusiastic about working in your company, and you do get that energy level, right? However, there is no retention of institutional knowledge, and that in the long run, right, could be detrimental. So definitely, if you want to embark on something like that, you must have one of your salaried guys, or maybe one of the founders, sitting in a position where he or she can hold the institutional knowledge. And yes, while it can be a chore to train again every intern season, it's better than letting the interns figure it out on their own, right? So you must have someone holding the institutional knowledge. I find that in a setup like this, and I totally agree with Jonathan when he said that if the guy makes you more money than you're paying him, why not, right? Why not? But that step can be scary. Okay, that step can be scary. So if you want to mitigate it, of course, look at having a higher commission and a lower base. And make sure, like I said, if you like it, should have put a ring on it. Make sure that you have very clear agreements between your employees, okay, employment contract, or with your freelancers, provision of services type of agreement, detailing exactly how you will be paying them and when you will be paying them, and what are the milestones that entitles them to said payment. Yeah, so these are, I would say, very important issues to consider.
Right. So we want to talk a bit more on sustainability and all that, right? But I think, it's also quite important for us to tie it to IP. And, this is our pet topic, right, Samuel? So I want you to, just address in, just 2-3 minutes, just talk to us about the IP related considerations that we would need to think about, especially when we're coming up with the store, right? I mean, there's so many possibilities, right? That, suddenly we need to think about IP then. So talk to us about IP.
Oh, I'm glad you asked. Intellectual properties are really a type of assets in your business or in your venture that you can't really do without. It is a spectrum. Okay, on one hand, you have inventions that are patented, and which are really expensive to get to grant stage. And on the other hand, you have copyrighted materials that are created with copyrights subsisting in them from the point of creation. So what kind of IPs you have is really very much determined by the kind of business you have, whether you are selling food items or whether you are selling handicraft, so it's quite a wide range. So in most cases, however, you'll find that a trademark is really your really lowest lying IP that you can pick up on. What is a trademark? A trademark is a business indicator, indicating to the general public and educating them about that group of symbols that function as a badge of origin for your goods or services. So it is almost inherent in the way we run businesses. The moment you set up something, you will be calling it by a name, right? And you will use that name repeatedly in reference to those goods and services. And that in time could actually become your trademark. But if you're a bit more put together, you're a bit more intentional in the way you do things, maybe you would have already created a trademark separately, and you will be applying that trademark in your venture. So, back to this whole idea about a charity for Jamie and Lee in their development team, they may have to propose to their board that, hey, look, can we use may we use the charity's logo in conjunction with this venture, right? And that would actually do the job of tying up the venture with the charity very nicely. Yeah, and along the way, if you come up with something that is proprietary, of course, stake a claim on it. In most cases, unless you're dealing with a high tech or something that is very unique or novel, there is very little protection in terms of patents or registered designs. In fact, the opposite is true. If you are using somebody else's copyrights, okay, make sure you ask for permission. Okay, being a charity doesn't absolve you from infringement. Yeah. So if you are going to use Marvel comic characters, but maybe you put your own spin on them, or you're gonna use Elsa's, and all the Annas and Elsas in the world, and and make something, make sure you have that permission. More likely than not, you may have to consider doing a tie-up, doing a song and dance with the rights holder so that they gain some kind of CSR, goodwill, or maybe they themselves, will, at the very least, they bless it and they just stay in the background, right? So you have to check. You need to make sure that not only are you protecting your own IP, you need to make sure you are not infringing on other rights holders as well. Yeah, I don't know, Jonathan, have you seen any such cases?
Well, I mean, so we don't. Yes, I mean, we monitor if there is if somebody flags an illegal products on any of the stores. We do take that seriously. So I would say that maybe in that context of your discussion, if you do sell things that are prohibited by Shopify and has a copyright infringement, people can file, they can file a complaint, and we will investigate. And if that is the case, we'll chances are Shopify will shut down your your store, or ask you to remove the items. If you keep repeating it, obviously that has a further implication. But I would say that yes. Now, one other point that came to mind as you were mentioning that many sellers or many web stores like to do this drop shipping model because it's quite easy. They don't need to worry about anything else. They can sign up and then somebody else already make the products and somebody else will ship it for you. So your role is basically have a storefront, process the payment, and then forward it to somebody else taking care of that. Yes, that is easy, but at the same time, it can also come with its own complication. I'll tell you why. One, that goes to the other point about copyright products or maybe illegal products, because you don't know, it's not your products. You don't quite know, perhaps. I think you need to do a little bit more research on that. And second of all, you don't own the customer experience, right? So think about it as an organization. You spend so much time designing your website, designing the content, really focusing on the customer interactions, customer service, but the last mile of it, the packaging, the way it's being shipped. And remember when there's a question about what happens to the missing products or broken items and all of that, you have no control over that when it comes to drop ship, right? Because somebody else is doing it for you. So I think but then customers, when they complain, guess what? They're not complaining to the drop shipper because they don't really know sometimes who's behind that your store, but they'll complain to you. And again, that is something that you need to take into consideration.
Right. Those are really good points. As we talked about sustainability, right? And we actually have a lot more questions to go, but
yeah.
I wanna move on to the Q&A segment and then take on more questions.
Sure.
We've been receiving some questions, but just a reminder to everybody else to please continue to drop your questions in the Q&A icon segment on your screen, which is at the bottom of your window. Okay, so what we've been talking about IP as well as about selling things that it's not something that you would have created yourselves. Maybe you got it from, say, Taobao or something like that. Okay, so there are two questions which are surrounding these issues. So let's take one of it first. The first one is what kind of legal action can we take if we know someone has a malicious intent to slander the brand, your brand? Okay, so let's start with Samuel. Your thoughts, and then Jonathan, you can add on.
That sounds really specific. Yeah, but I guess it's really how you want to position yourself. Well, haters are always going to hate, and you'll find that no matter what you do, you will not please all of your stakeholders. Maybe what ought to be done is really to investigate and invite a dialogue, right, with the person who is slandering the brand. I once had to help this listed company deal with a complaint that was made by a rather prominent member of society. Specifically, the complainant remarked that the fish that he bought at the restaurant that he ate was not exactly fresh. So at the time, of course, the restaurant owner was rather livid. The COO was upset, and they say, "What do you mean? I handpicked at the fish market myself. It's a live fish. We just fished it out of the tank. That sort of thing." But rather than go off the edge and engage in a war of words, what they teach in the good book is true. A gentle word turns away anger. So maybe sometimes it's really just inviting that person to share their experience, to acknowledge how the person feels, and of course, use all good endeavors. Use your best endeavors to try and resolve it. But of course, if the intention of the complainant really is to just slander the brand or to drag the brand through mud, then of course, appropriate legal actions may be taken. But again, weigh the cost of doing so. You might win the battle, but ultimately lose the war. How would it sound if someone pick up on it and say that, oh, brand so and so or charity such and such took a customer to court, right? It sounds really awful, from where I'm standing. And my firm handles dispute cases as well for a living, right? And what I'm saying is really this: not all cases will require or should result in a legal response. Yeah, because it may not be cost effective. It may have other unintended consequences, like causing a negative view of your branding instead. Yeah.
Right. Jonathan, any thoughts to add?
Yeah, I agree with Samuel, and I would say if we're talking about online reviews, let's say on Google reviews or any of these websites, actually it's quite difficult for you to get those companies to remove a bad review. So my suggestions, and I'm giving that advice to a number of other companies as well, because this is not new, right? So you will have some people just doing this, either they have a legitimate reasons, or they have a misunderstanding, or they just really want to slander because, I don't know, for whatever reasons that kind of floats their boat, right? But my advice is that don't do two things. One, don't respond to those messages with a cookie cutter, kind of like a boilerplate corporate response, like, thank you for your, whatever, send your email. Like I wouldn't do that, right? Because it doesn't look genuine, and other people reading it is like, oh my God, this organization is kind of dismissive. And second, don't get too emotional. Actually, Samuel is right. When you start going like that, then people's like, wow, my God, this organization takes so personal. Like, okay, like if it's not true, then why you're so angry? But then your argument is, I'm angry because it's not true. But I think we have to look at it with a level headed. You don't want to go into a war in the social media. I would say actually a compassionate and a thoughtful response. It will go far, and people will read that as well. I would say if you read a review that you don't like, the first draft, that you wrote, don't send it. Leave it on. You can write it. I'm speaking from my own experience as well. I'm like typing like there is no tomorrow, right? Until maybe all my fingers bleed. I don't know, whatever. I would type it and I'll save it, right? Because then it's good for me to just leave it out. I'll look at it the next day, or also I run it by another person, then to see it a different perspective. And almost guarantee you 100% of the time I look at it again, I'm like, oh my God, I'm so glad I did not send that, because it is in the sort of, when you are in that moment, you don't think clearly. And again, as what Samuel says, there is a bigger, your brand and how you engage. Also, look at and we tend to be like that, right? Let's say we have 1,000 customers and 999 customers were happy, but one customer says something, you like immediately focusing on that. But look at the big picture. Like seriously, like your reviews, of course you want to have a perfect review 5.0, but is it realistic? Is it okay if it's 4.9? Matter of fact, sometimes, again, looking at from a different perspective, a perfect review all the time, it kind of a little bit suspicious, right?
Yeah.
Are you paying these people? Like, you're selling me in a year or whatever, how many years, you never had any bad experience, that makes me a bit cautious of this website, right? So actually, variety of it is like, look, people are quite, reasonable. If, you're 4.9, 4.8, that's actually quite, it's normal, like everybody has a bad review at some point.
Right. So that's a very comprehensive perspective from both of you. So we have just a little bit of time, and I just wanted to quickly cover our two remaining questions, and I'm gonna send you one question each. So let's go with Sam first. Sam, This is a question based on what you said earlier. So this is about the 70-30 rule thing, right? So does it mean, so very quickly in 1 minute, does it mean that the selling of goods and services, is it considered as a donation in exchange? And if that's the case, how will tax receipts be dealt with? Okay.
All right. This is a question from Jerome.
Yeah.
Does that mean that selling goods and services is really considered a donation in exchange? I'm not sure if donations or donations in kind will work that way these days. I understand that if you want some kind of tax receipts, it has to be cash mostly. But again, what purpose would it serve in your setup, okay, for the selling of the goods to be done by a private entity and then proceeds applied to a charity, right? But again, I had this conversation with a few of my tax associates, including one that used to be with IRAS. And the consistent answer I got was, it really depends on the factual circumstances, right? How you set up and how you choose to look at it. But if you ask me whether it will be considered a donation, I find it a bit hard, if you are really donating that service of sale, right, or the service itself as a donation. I think it probably would not be considered, but again, please don't take my word for it. Consult a tax advisor. Okay, your charity probably have accountants or auditors working with it. Check with them, right? Because at the end of the day, it is also how they choose to capture the transaction, right? And that makes a world of difference as well. Yeah.
Okay. Quickly, the next question, or rather the last question that we have before we bring our Q&A to a close, Jonathan, what challenges should we be aware of when second-hand items are being sold or offered on the store?
Yep, quality. That's it, one word. No, if I wanted to explain it, but it's quality, right? So secondhand, a lot of people also you need to be as detailed as possible. What is this quality is, right? So brand new is easy. Everybody has this idea already what brand new looks like. But used items, that has quite a range, right? Is it like new? Is it mint? Is it collector edition, or is it really used? But how much we're talking about use here, right? So for some people, one scratch is still consider okay, but maybe another person's like, oh my god, I don't want anything that has scratches. So I would say that try to be as transparent as possible. Take high quality photos, as many as possible. The good thing about a platform like Shopify, it doesn't cost you extra to upload another photo. It's better to have more photos than later on you have to deal with people complaining, have to ship it back. Take photos, like close-up photos, every single angle, and say that this is it, right? So even if there is a little mark, you just say, just over-communicate. Now, of course, you might think like, well, I'm afraid I'm over-communicating. How about if I over-communicate to the point where the customers will be not wanted to buy? Okay, yeah, but again, for me, I'd rather have not that customer buy versus later on, they say they don't like it. They say that I'm trying to lie about the quality or whatever it is. I would like to be as transparent, as forthcoming as possible. If you don't want to buy, then it's not for you, then so be it, right? And But I would say that you can make it a bit fun as well. So I've seen another example that the review is quite fun, right? So they make it is not as the scratches, but it could be like, hey, you know, this is just what life is, right? So the owner is so passionate. The previous owner was obviously very proud of this product and use it quite often, and you know, so you can make it as well that yes, this is a used product, people using it, right? Unless it's a collector edition, but if it's a collector edition, I wouldn't say that it's a second hand. I would put it as collector edition like quality, right? So it means that it's a mint. Usually people will put it in a box or something kind of like that.
So be very clear and specific, and make sure we over communicate if we have to be just to protect our interests, right? That's really where the message is. So we have to bring our Q&A session to a close, and we've reached the end of our time. So we hope that you have a better insight as to the legal and practical areas to consider when transitioning to an e-commerce platform. And after this webinar ends, I am told that there'll be a feedback form that'll be shown in your browser for your completion. So would appreciate if you could all just take a couple of minutes to complete the form so that we can improve our webinars. And thank you once again, Samuel and Jonathan, for sharing your valuable insights. And thank you to all our participants for joining us today. And I hope you have a great week ahead. Jonathan has shared his LinkedIn profile URL there. So, you know, if you would like to connect with him, please do so. And, you know, feel free to connect with any of us. We'll be happy to be in touch, and do take care to everyone.